So today we are in the first class of SailPoint IdentityNow training. So before we go ahead more towards the IdentityNow training part, let's refresh couple of basic things related to identity management. What is identity management? What are all the different terminologies that we are going to use in the identity management context. Then we'll talk about why cloud, why people are and why companies are more inclined towards adapting any cloud solution, what kind of advantages they are getting as compared to the on-premise solutions. Then we are going to discuss about how Identity Now is doing, what kind of architecture Identity Now is currently having, what are all the different availability zones of Identity Now as a software as a service provider. Then we'll discuss about a little bit more towards the architecture in depth. And then we'll talk about how we are going to do the lab, what are all the topics that are going to be covered as part of the training and so on. Okay, so let's start with the basic identity management terminologies first, just for the refresher. So let me take the same example that I always used to take. Let's say you, along with your couple of friends, sit for an interview and you got selected. Now, once you get selected, the HR or the recruiter, HR or recruiter personnel get in touch with you and they are going to share the offer letter with you. Once they share the offer letter, before the day of joining, they are also expecting you to upload all the necessary documents. All the necessary documents needs to be uploaded to the company portal. So they are expecting you to upload all the necessary documents. Now, let's say before the joining itself, you uploaded all the document. Now, what kind of document these are? So these are basically your personal details, your identification details, your educational qualification details, and your work experience details. And the personal details, you are going to mention your first name, last name, father's name, all those things. Identification detail is a very important thing where they are expecting you to provide a document which represent who you are. Basically your Aadhaar information, your passport details, your any personal identification, government ID proof, kind of that. Then in the educational detail, they are expecting you to upload the degree certificates, that what is the higher level of education you are currently having. And then in the work experience detail, they are expecting you to provide them the service letter, that okay, in past you worked in so and so company, and whenever you leave any organization, they by default provide you a service letter, or also called it as a relieving letter. Okay, so they expect you all these details so that a background verification can be done, and if everything went fine, on the day one you are going to join the company. Let's say everything went fine with these friends and they are given a date in future, that okay, let's say 7th of July will be your date of joining. Okay, now let's move forward. Let's say it's 7th of July. Now all these users visited the office. All the users visited the office on day one. When they visited the office, they need to collect the ID badge, and by evening they also receive a message or call from their manager that okay, this is your mail ID and this is the temporary password. That okay, you need to basically log into the portal and you need to update your or change your password. So on day one you are receiving this. Along with that, by default you are having access to basic couple of basic access. For example, you are having the access to the company website, couple of applications where you can update your profile, you can update your previous employment details, you can update your PF account details, all those things. So basically you are having access to couple of applications where you are also given a instruction in the induction session that okay, you need to fill up the time sheet, all those things. So by default on day one you are having access to all these applications by default. Okay, now let's say you have been assigned into a project and you worked in that project for let's say 3-4 years. Let's say you assigned into a project and you started to work, and let's say let's move forward, you worked in that project for around 3-4 years. Okay, now when you worked in that project for 3-4 years, after that you are getting a good opportunity outside. Now you have make your mind that okay, you are planning to leave the organization. So what is the general process we used to follow? So whenever in case of any kind of termination that okay, you are planning to resign or terminate or resign the organization, we always need to contact the HR of the organization. Now some organization may have an online portal where you can submit your resignation, and ultimately your HR is going to get notified that okay, so and so employee has submitted the resignation. So let's say you put down your paper. Now, when you put down your paper, by default, the HR and the manager will get notified that, okay, so and so employee put down the paper. Now, depending upon your criticality and depending upon your importance, there will be internal discussion with your manager and HR that, okay, whether you wanted to keep this employee or not. Let's say you don't want to stay in the organization due to some reason, let's say toxic environment, or you are getting a very good package outside, so you don't want it to stay at all. So let's say you said the HR that okay, I wanted to leave and this is my final decision. Once you said that, based upon the notice period, okay, when you join the organization, by default each and every organization have got a default notice period that okay, from the date of submission of the resignation, you need to serve at least so many days. In India, most of the companies now having a notice period of 60 days or 90 days. In US, it's 15 days or 30 days. Okay. So depending upon the date, when you put down the paper, they will add this notice period. Let's say if it is 30 days, then they will set the end date or termination date of the user to a date which will be calculated. Let's say on 7th of July, you put down the paper. 7th plus 30, it's basically 7th of August. That will be set to your termination date. Okay. Now on the last working day, before you leave the organization, last week you need to follow couple of process. Now, what kind of process you need to follow? You need to follow the termination process, that you need to get the clearance from most of the department like finance department, library, then some other departments. You need to get the clearance so that the full and final settlement will be done. Okay, now let's say everything is done on the last working day. By evening, you will notice that all your access has been revoked. All your access has been revoked. Now there is no manual intervention, everything is happening automatically. So here what we have seen, that from the day you join the organization till the day you left the organization, okay, the entire employee lifecycle management, or let's say a contractor lifecycle management, is taken care by a identity management software. So the first feature of any identity management software is the user lifecycle management. So any identity management software will provide this feature of user lifecycle management. Okay, this is the core of any identity management. Now there are various lifecycle states of a user. For example, let's say the first stage is joiner. That okay, you join the organization. What are all the things that needs to be granted and all? Then there's a state of mover. Let's say you got promoted, you changed your location, you got moved into another department. So there's a case of mover. Then we have the third case, that is termination. That okay, you left the organization. That we call it as termination. Then there's another fourth stage that is called as rehire. That okay, you are being rehired, let's say after 2 years in the same organization. So these are the four basic life cycle stages of any employee inside the organization. Okay, so this entire life cycle management is taken care by any identity management software. This is the first thing. Now the second feature is password management. Now in earlier, whenever your account gets logged out or you are not able to log into the company portal and all, you need to basically call the help desk. You need to call the help desk that okay, please reset my password and send me the temporary password. Now there was a huge resource and effort was involved just for managing the password for the user. Okay, when this identity management solution come into the picture, it provided the functionality of self-service password reset. Now you can basically reset your password without asking any help desk personnel. So this is the another functionality of any identity management software nowadays. Okay, they provide you a self-service feature for the password reset. Now the third and very most important point is basically the compliance module. We call it as audit and compliance. Audit and compliance. Now, what is this audit and compliance? So when we talk about audit, it basically helps the organization to know which users are doing what and whether they are allowed to do that thing or not. So as part of that, the auditing will come into the picture, who is doing what and whether they are allowed to do that or not. Okay, if not, it will raise a flag. So for any identity management solution, it is a must thing to perform the auditing. Okay, so that you can basically identify a high risk user, a contractor who is not allowed to do a particular task, but he is doing that. So it will help the organization to become more and more secure. Okay, and when we talk about this compliance module, then this compliance module is basically nowadays mandatory for each and every organization. If you are working in a healthcare organization, there are a couple of norms or compliance certification you need to follow. For example, you might have heard about very normal certification like SOX. You might have heard about HIPAA. Then we have something called PHI. Then we have something called, let's say, GXP, and so on. So there are multiple compliances that a organization need to follow. Now, depending upon, let's say, a application is a SOX application. Okay. Let's say inside an organization, there is a SOX compliant application. Now, when we say a SOX compliant application means the application is following the SOX compliance, okay, or SOX regulation. Now, as per SOX regulation, let's say they are saying that on every 3 months, the access needs to be reviewed. What does that mean? It is saying that, okay, in order to be a application, to be a SOX compliant application, then on every 3 months, the access needs to be reviewed. Now, what access needs to be reviewed? The employees or the contractor who are having access to that application, which is SOX compliant, there would be an application owner or application reviewer who is going to review whether these sets of employee or contractor still need the access or not. Because in general, what is happening in past, let's say today you assign into a project. Now, in order to work into that project, you have been given access to a SOX compliant application. Now, after 3 months, you got released from that project because the project is completed. But your access is still there in that application. Though you are not working, so ideally your access must be revoked, right? Because you are no longer working in that project. Now, as per the SOX compliant, this access needs to be reviewed on every 3 months. Okay. Now, in order to implement such kind of thing, we have a concept of something called access review. In some other tools, it is also referred as certification. So both are same. Now, this access review or certification is part of the compliance module. Now, apart from this access review or certification, we also have something called policies. Okay, we have also called something called policies. We also refer it as segregation of duties. So inside the compliance module, there are mainly two things that will come into the picture. The first one is certification, and the second one is SOD or policies. Now, what is SOD or policy? This is basically a mechanism through which the organization can raise the high risk items. For example, let's say your organization has a very basic policy that no contractor should have access to a particular application. Now, if it is found that, okay, there is a user who have access to this application, then it will raise a flag. It will raise a flag. So there are two different approach in which this SOD or policies can be implemented. One is the detective approach and the other one is the preventive approach. We'll talk about these things in detail in the later section. Then this audit and compliance is also one of the major functionality of any identity management solution. But when we talk about auditing and compliance, the name changes from identity management to identity management and governance. When we talk about this module, audit and compliance, this is part of the governance. That, okay, you are looking into the things, how the things are happening. So that is the part of governance. So nowadays, many identity management solution are also referred as IGA, identity management and governance solution. Okay. Now, so these are the basic feature of any identity management solution. Now, the fourth feature that I missed writing over here is basically this self-service feature. Now, what is this self-service feature? That is a very interesting feature that evolved with identity management solution. Nowadays, many of us do online shopping. Now, let's say you wanted to purchase a laptop. So you went into the any online portal, let's say Amazon, you selected the laptop. Once you selected the laptop, you place the order. When you place the order, it will ask you for the payment. Once you've done the payment, then it will say, okay, the payment or the order has been placed successfully, and after so and so days, the item will be received by you. So what is the entire process? The first step is basically you logged in into the website. Second step, search the item. Third step, add to cart. Add to cart. What was the fourth step? The fourth step was payment. Now from here, there are two steps. If successful, if the payment is successful, then order placed. Else retry payment. So these are the high level of steps when you are going to purchase any item online, right? Now, this entire real world concept has been implemented in identity management solution as well. Here, the item that we are talking about right now, which we are searching, it's a kind of access. Let's say you want access to a particular application. Now you logged in into the SailPoint or any identity management system portal. You search for the access. Once you search for the access, you submit the request. Okay. Once you submit the request, then it will go for the approval. This is also referred as approval. Now, depending upon the application criticality, there is a assigned approver for each and every item that you have defined in the identity management solution. That okay, if a person is raising a request for this item, then it will follow, let's say, first level of approval, or two level of approval, or three level of approval, and who are the approver for these items are also defined. So when you submit the request, it will go for the approval. Now once it's approved, if the outcome is approved, then what will happen? The SailPoint or any identity management system will automatically grant you the access. If it is rejected, then the request will be closed. Request will be closed. So this is how the things are actually happening. So these are the basic four features of any identity management and governance solution. Okay. Now when we talk about this identity management solution, there are on a high level, there are basic things how any identity management solution works. Okay. So let's refresh that as well. Let's say this is my identity management solution. I'm giving the name as IGA. Okay. Now any identity management solution will work on employees and contractors. So there must be a way you can import all the user base into the identity management solution, because at the end of the day we are going to do the user lifecycle management, for which we should have all the user base. So generally in most of the organizations, all the users are being stored or managed or maintained in any HRMS system. All the users are there in the HRMS system. So this is my HRMS system. Okay. From the HRMS system, the IGA will receive the user. So let me put an arrow. So from the HRMS system, the IGA is receiving the user. Now, when I say self-service feature, IGA will automatically provision or grant the user access. So the IGA will also getting connected with multiple target systems. So let me create couple of target system. This is, let's say, my Active Directory. Let me create couple of others as well. Let's say this is some database application. I'm given the name of that database application as Wintel application, let's say, and many more. So basically this IGA is also capable of writing the data. Okay. Now, when any identity management system is receiving the data, that is when the data flow is coming towards IGA. Okay, you can also put this arrow in this way as well, that when you are receiving the data from these systems, we call this on a high level term, we call this as aggregation. We call it as aggregation. Okay. Now, when the data flow is from IGA to the target system, that is from here you can see the data flow is going from IGA to AD, we call it as provisioning. We call it as provisioning. Okay. So in this entire training, we'll talk about only aggregation and provisioning. Okay, because this is the core of any identity management system. You need to understand in a very basic level that whenever you are receiving the data, the IGA is receiving the data, we call it as aggregation. Now, what kind of data it is receiving? Let's say if you are receiving account information, it is called account aggregation. When you are receiving group information, it is called group aggregation. Okay. Now, when you are receiving the data from the trusted source, that is this example, HRMS. So this is trusted source for IGA that will create all the user base. We call it as trusted or authoritative. Trusted or authoritative aggregation. Okay. When we receive normal data from any target system, we call it as aggregation. Now this aggregation will contain two set of data. The first one is account and the second one is group. Okay. So this is about the IGA solution. Okay. Now, when you have all the users, when you have these systems inbuilt, then we are going to put whenever you are going to have this entire thing intact, where we have the aggregation and provisioning working together, then we are going to put up the governance module. Only after this we are going to implement the governance, like auditing and compliance, because until unless the user are not having access to anything, what you are going to govern. So this is the basic. Okay, up to this part, anyone, any question? I take it as a no. Okay, so let's move forward. If there is no questions, then we'll take it forward from here. Now we talked about this basic identity management terminologies. Now most of you already been trained on the identity IQ, right? That is the on-premise solution of SailPoint. Now, before we talk more into that, let's talk about what is a SaaS solution, what kind of thing a SaaS solution follow, what kind of architecture basically it follows, and what kind of advantages it is providing to an organization, why organizations are a little bit more inclined towards implementing the SaaS solution on their infrastructure. Okay, so let's talk about all those basic things. So the first thing that we are going to talk about now is basically identity now. So as most of you already been dealt up with the identity IQ, we know identity IQ is a on-prem solution. On-prem solution. Now, when you say on-prem solution means the entire infrastructure. Entire infrastructure is being managed by the organization or customer. Where you are going to deploy the solution will be managed by the customer. Then the maintenance activity, which includes your patching, upgradation, this is being taken care by the customer himself. This is being taken care by the customer himself. Now, customer need a dedicated infrastructure to have this identity IQ solution up and running. It's the customer headache to take care of infrastructure, the patching and upgradation, all the activities. So there are couple of pro of this solution and there are a couple of cons as well of this solution. Okay. Now let's say the pro is, let's talk about the con first. So there's a overhead for the customer to do the infrastructure management and the maintenance activity, because when you do the patching and upgradation, it's a long process for the customer. They need to prepare for the downtime, they need to prepare for the upgradation, applying the patch, and then they bring up the server, they do the sanity checks whether all the components are up and running or not. So these are the kind of headache. And also for the infrastructure part, if anything went wrong, then the infrastructure team needs to be involved. What kind of, let's say you are facing some network issue, you are facing the disk issue, disk is overloaded, kind of that. So each and every headache is at the customer end, and whenever you are with the on-prem solution, the things to make the time to make the changes on the production environment is a little bit longer as compared to any SaaS based solution, because you need to first do it in pre-prod, prod, and then do it in the production. Now this entire journey will be a little bit longer as compared to the SaaS solution. Now the pro part is, that was the con part. The positive side of this on-prem solution is, the first thing is definitely security. The first thing is definitely security, because you are in charge of the data, where your data is stored, what kind of infrastructure you wanted to provide. Let's say you are serving millions of users, so depending upon your requirement, you can scale the environment. So all these things are in your hand. Secondly, your data is being residing in your company infrastructure. So depending upon your data center, you can store the information. It is not in any kind of public cloud and all those places. Okay. Now, most of the organizations are also basically deploying this identity IQ solution on cloud. There also, because infrastructure part, they don't wanted to keep it with themselves. They wanted to use uh, any of the cloud service provider. Either they are deploying it on the AWS cloud, or they are deploying it on the Google cloud or Oracle cloud. So depending upon their own preference. Okay. So this is how the identity IQ was working. Okay. Now when we talk about this identity now is basically a SaaS based solution. When we talk about this identity now, it's a software as a service. It's a software as a service solution. That is, it is providing you the services based on subscription model. Based on subscription model, it is providing you the services. Now, at present, they have 4 to 5 different high-level set of services that they are selling as part of the identity now. There is a service of password management, there is a service of self-service feature, there is a service of certification, there is a service of single sign-on. So there are 4 to 5 different type of services they are selling as part of the subscription model. Now, depending upon your need, you can opt for any of the services. Okay. Now, this is a truly SaaS solution. Now, whenever any SaaS solution will come into the picture, the architecture part is very much important. The architecture part will come into the picture and it is very much important. Okay. Now, you might have heard about this very fancy term that is called multi-tenant architecture. Multi-tenant, you might have heard about this fancy term called multi-tenant architecture. Okay. So whenever any SaaS solution is being implemented, let's say today Microsoft comes up with the Office 365, which is a SaaS solution. Then Atlassian also come up with the SaaS solution. Previously, they were providing the Jira, Bitbucket, all those things were the Confluence, all those things were the on-prem solution. Then later they come up with the cloud solution. Okay. So whenever any company coming into the SaaS side, cloud side, software as a service side, they have to follow this multi-tenant architecture. Now, why multi-tenant? What is multi-tenant architecture? So we'll discuss about those things in detail because this is one of the important topic that you must know, and this is being used by multiple software as a service solution provider. So first, let's talk about a single tenant architecture. Let's talk about single tenant architecture. Let's say we were talking about earlier a little bit. Nowadays, many companies are deploying this identity IQ on the cloud. Let's say you have your company opted AWS cloud. Okay. And they have basically want for the production environment, they have opted for 4 different VM. Okay. These all are, let's say, EC2 instances. EC2 instances. Okay. Where they provided the compute as, let's say, 8 CPU, let's say 64 GB memory, and let's say 512 GB SSD. So all these systems are having the same kind of configuration. Okay. Now in the production environment, they wanted to set up 4 different nodes, out of which 2 nodes serve as a UI node and 2 of them serve as a task server node. Now, when they opted for these things, they also opted one more EC2 instance for the database side, for the DB hosting side. Okay. Now they install the first instance of SailPoint over here, second instance of SailPoint Identity IQ over here, third instance, fourth instance, and this is for the database side. Okay. So they have installed, let's say, SailPoint instance 1, similarly instance 2, 3, 4, and this is the DB part. Now, whenever you are going ahead, this SailPoint instance 1, this AWS cloud is being controlled by the customer because this is the customer environment, right? Now, whenever this kind of thing, you will see that, okay, the application in this EC2 instance, all these EC2 instance have only one single instance of SailPoint deployed. Okay. And this is being used by one customer. This is being used by one customer, means all the resources are being utilized by the single customer. In SaaS term, a single customer is referred as tenant. A single customer or the user is referred as tenant. So this environment, this entire thing, we call it as single tenant architecture. Single tenant architecture, that okay, this entire machines compute resource are being used by the single customer. So that's why this single come into the picture, and tenant is customer. So all these resources are being utilized by one single customer. So this is called single tenant architecture. Now you might have understand what is multi-tenant architecture. Let's say let's say over here we have a pool of resources. Okay, we have a pool of resources. What does that mean? This pool will contain multiple virtual machines, multiple compute instances. Okay, this pool contains multiple compute instances, and we also have separate or single database with different schemas. Okay, then we have the lookup services. We have the lookup services. What this lookup services will be utilized, we'll discuss a little bit later. Let's say in the multi-tenant architecture, we are having the single pool of resources where we are deploying the application. The single instance of the application will be deployed across all the pool of resources. Okay. Now this pool of resources is being utilized by multiple customer, means the same resource is being utilized by multiple customers. Whenever you come across this kind of thing, we call it as multi-tenant architecture. That okay, the single resource is being utilized by multiple customers. We call it as multi-tenant architecture. Now, what is the advantage of multi-tenant architecture? The biggest advantage of multi-tenant architecture is basically, let's say this pool of resources, we deployed the IdentityNow. The single instance of IdentityNow software is deployed. Okay. Now, what data that needs to be served to the customer, that is stored in the database. Software is same, only the database is different. The data is different, right? So here, let's say tomorrow we wanted to apply the patching. Okay, if we have single tenant architecture, that okay, like Savient is doing. Savient is basically following the single tenant architecture. They are having a separate AWS resource for each and every customer. So whenever they wanted to apply the patching, let's say they have 200 customers, they need to repeat the process 200 times, because each and every customer data is stored in a different virtual machine. But when we talk about IdentityNow, since it follow a multi-tenant architecture, we have to just apply the patching in one place and it will be replicated to all the customers which are utilizing that zone. For example, right now they are currently having 8 availability zone. They are currently having 8 availability zone. Now, what are all the locations that they are right now serving the things? There are 2 locations in US, US East and US West. Then they have 2 locations in Europe. The first one is London and the second one is Frankfurt. Then they have a location in Australia. They have in Tokyo. They are in Singapore. So 2 to 4, 3, 7, and there is one more location where they are having the availability zone. Now, what this availability zone is, basically they have a different set of AWS regions where they are following the things. So basically right now they are having the pool of resources, what you are saying right now, in 8 different zones. Now, depending upon the customer locations, they are selecting that nearest availability zone and they provide the access to the customer from that particular zone. Okay, so there are 8 zones as per 2023. I might have to check that if they have added something new in 2024 or not. But there are around 8 availability zone. 8 availability zone means 8 different data centers. Okay, and all the 8 different data centers, they are not replicating the data. Okay, all are isolated. So basically, in a multi-tenant architecture, assume it in a very simple way. Let's say you are having a building. Let's say you are having a building. Okay. Now inside the building, you might have seen we have multiple flats. We have 2 BHK, we have 3 BHK flats. Let's say we have 4 BHK, and there are multiple flats are there, right? There are multiple flats are there inside the building. Now, this entire building, you can consider it as a infrastructure. Now, this infrastructure is being utilized by multiple customers. All these flats are tenants and they are isolated. They are not isolated physically, but they are isolated logically. Means the application, database, all these things are isolated logically, not physically, because they are sitting in the same machine. But in the application context, they have written the application in such a way that they are logically isolated from each other. Okay, now depending upon your work that okay you wanted to manage these sets of user and all, you can opt for, let's say you have 3 members or you have, let's say, 8 members in the family. So depending upon your family strength, you can either opt for 4 BHK or 3 BHK. So this is how they are selling the tenants. Okay, now this is called a multi-tenant architecture. Anyone, any question in this part, up to this part? I take it as a no. So basically, how this entire architecture will look. Let's say this is my IdentityNow cloud. In the IdentityNow cloud, there are a couple of things which are shared across customers. There are a couple of services which are shared across customers. Let me name those services over here. Let's say we have logging services that is shared across customer. We have monitoring things. Then we have alerting. We have scalability. And search. Now, when we talk about this search, this is basically used, they are using this Elasticsearch for doing the searching. So we'll talk about Elasticsearch also, not now, but in later point of time. Then they have various microservices. There are various microservices as well. Now, they are providing, as I mentioned, they are providing multiple subscription or services to their customer. Let me just name couple of services over here. They are providing single sign-on services. They are providing password management services. They are providing access review that is called as certification. Then they are providing provisioning services that you can also grant user access to the target system. You can onboard the application and all those things. Then we have access request, that is the self-service feature. So inside the IdentityNow cloud, we have various tenants. Multiple customers are using it. This is being shared across all the customer, all these things. These are the microservices that are deployed on the cloud side. This is the UI part. Okay, this is how the multi-tenant architecture of SailPoint look like. Any question up to this part? I take it as a no. Now we'll talk about that. Okay, when you are or your customer is going to opt for any identity now environment, each and every customer is being granted two tenants. Each and every customer is being granted two tenants. The first one is production tenant, definitely. And the second tenant is sandbox. So there are two tenants, each and every customer is given whenever they purchase the license of identity now. Now this production tenant is basically a full featured. All the features are there. They have already enabled the monitoring and alerting. Okay, so here they are doing proactive monitoring. That if anything went wrong, they are jumping into the system, monitoring. And the third one is this is highly scalable. What does highly scalable means? That okay, if you want something more, that okay, you need some more computing resources for your environment, you have a big user base, you are having multiple applications that needs to be deployed, you can ask them to scale up your environment. So that is also, this is highly scalable. You can add more and more computing power. Okay. Now, when we talk about sandbox environment, this is a functional test environment. Basically, this is nothing but a test environment. Then here, in most of the cases, you can onboard maximum of 1,000 identities. You can onboard maximum of 1,000 identities. And here we have the limited scalability. Here we have limited scalability. Now, the next thing is, as we mentioned, talked about the availability zones, right? So there are 8 different data centers from where they are serving the things. Now they do have a website as well from where you can see that okay, in past how many times they were facing any service issue, because this is a SaaS based solution and every SaaS based solution must have got a status page. Okay, SailPoint also have the status page, status.sailpoint.com, where you can see that okay, whether anything went wrong in last 90 days or not. If you see in, let's start from the first one. These are the all the various. First one is the user interface. The user interface was up 99.91 times. For 0.09 time it was down. So on 15th May there were major outage. One component has a, so you can see even the uptime history and all. For US there was no problem. Frankfurt there was problem. So you can see which particular. So here you can see we have Singapore, Tokyo, Canada, Sydney, London, Frankfurt, Oregon, US West and East. So we have North Virginia, we have Oregon, we have Frankfurt, we have London, we have Sydney, we have Canada, we have Tokyo, we have Singapore. So these are the 8 different availability zone. These are the 8 different availability zone. And you can see on which availability zone it was having the problem. The problem was on different availability zone on the same day. Okay. Then we have various services. For example, provisioning services was having problem, partial outage of around 11 hours. So that is big for the organization, but yeah, once in a time it can be managed. Okay, so there are certain outages as well. For access is where access request password management, there were no outage in past. So you can see what kind of outages it was having. You can also check the incident history, that when they were facing the problem and all. So everything will be mentioned over here. that what was the root cause, how they solved it, and what kind of precaution they are going to take in future so that there should be no downtime. Okay, so this is the status page of Identity Now. Now they have also changed the name to Identity Security Cloud. Okay, the Identity Now is renamed to Identity Security Cloud. Okay, ISC. So this is about the Identity Now availability zone. Now, when you purchase a tenant, they are also following some kind of naming that okay, the tenant will be granted to you and there will be a naming associated with that. Okay, the default naming structure is basically contains this subdomain of identity. Now, let's say your organization name is identity classes. Okay, now when you go with SailPoint and try to purchase a license for Identity Now, your domain will look like, the production domain will look like identity classes dot identity now my tab is not working properly, identitynow.com. Okay, and the sandbox environment will be named to identity now hyphen sandbox. Hyphen sandbox dot identity now dot com. This is how the URL or the tenant information will be given to you. So it contains the subdomain of identity now. Now you can also choose your own preferred name at the time of tenant deployment. So this is how you can also do that. Okay. Now let's talk about a little bit in depth how this entire identity now architecture will look like. So let me go back to the same picture that we have already defined. Okay, so here. Now, there are one or two more components that will come into the picture when we talk about this Identity Now solution. Now, what all those components that will come into the picture? There is something called virtual appliance. When we work with Identity Now, this thing will always come into the picture, that is virtual appliance. Now this virtual appliance is responsible for provisioning to on-premise applications. Okay, previously it was also mandatory for SaaS solutions as well. Let's say you wanted to integrate Identity Now with any SaaS application, let's say Workday or let's say Atlassian Cloud. So previously it was mandatory that all the traffic will go via VA, the virtual appliance. Now what is virtual appliance? We'll talk about this in the upcoming classes. For the time being, just assume virtual appliance is a gateway through which the provisioning happens. Okay, through which provisioning and reconciliation happens. It went through the virtual appliance itself. Okay, so previously the virtual appliance was mandatory whether your target system is on-prem or SaaS. But now they make some improvement and they are bringing something VLS SaaS solution. That is for the SaaS based applications, you don't require the virtual appliance now. Okay. Now these services that we just now talked about, these are deployed in the Identity Now cloud as a microservices, as a microservices. services. Then we have something called task processing engine. Here in the Identity Now Cloud, we have also called task processing engine. Now that task processing engine will be used for processing the task inside the Identity Now Cloud. How it works and all we'll discuss in detail in the upcoming classes. Okay. So this is about the basic of identity management, multi-tenant architecture, single tenant architecture, how Identity Now, what are all the plus point Identity Now bringing into the table, and first and last and but for most important thing, nowadays SailPoint is pushing their customers to go to Identity Now Cloud. Okay, SailPoint is pushing their customer to go to Identity Now Cloud. Okay, this is one important point to notice. So this is how but customers which are big organization, they still stick with this on-prem solution because they find it much more flexible and they can customize to their own requirement. But when you come to Identity Now, there are certain limitations. You cannot do full-fledged customization in the Identity Now solution. That's the limitation of this tool. Now, how the UI interface look like for Identity Now? Let me just open my instance right now. Let me quickly log in. So this is how the Identity Now console look like. We do have an admin console. Under admin console, basically you'll be able to see dashboard, identity management, where you can see the list of identities, account, profiles. We'll discuss about all those things, access model, application, connections, where you used to have the virtual appliance deployed, sources, what are all the target system you have integrated, whether you have integrated any service desk integration and all those things. Then we have certifications, password management. In the global settings, you can do the system settings, security setting, reporting, email template, forms, and all. Then we have the concept of workflow that is newly introduced by SailPoint, which is similar to a UI based console through which you can do multiple things. Then we have something called event triggers. Okay. So this is how the SailPoint console look like.